bring our first moderator out to the stage. When I asked each moderator a question. I said, tell me something that this group, that the audience isn't going to know about you that you want them to know. So our first moderator, Abe Madcore, responded by saying, I'm the youngest of 7 kids. I'm from Vermont, and I was not a choir boy. How did I screw this one up?
I was an altar boy.
Altar boy, that's it. I was an altar boy all through high school. Abe Madcore, the executive editor of the Sports Business Journal.
Good. How's everyone doing? Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, my man. No choir boy here, but it's great to be with all of you today. I'm going to introduce our panel. We're going to get started. Jeff Gordon, Vice Chairman of Hendrick Motorsports. Give it up for Jeff Gordon. We also have Brad Keselowski with us today, owner and driver for RFK Racing. Give it up for Brad, please. And please join me in a warm welcome for Heather Gibbs, co-owner of Joe Gibbs Racing. So we've got a great panel. Ask your questions. I think Jonathan might have mentioned that, but we have them here on the app, and I will review them as they come in. I'll go to questions early and often. Welcome. Good to have you all here. So I want to start with how do we feel about the economics of ownership of a NASCAR team right now? Jeff, I'll start with you.
Oh, wow. Let's just go straight into it.
Go right into it.
I like this going to Jeff first.
Well, I mean, you have to have a little bit of context and history, before you can even answer that question. So, I mean, you look at a lot of owners like Rick Hendrick when he first got into the sport in 1984, he's passionate about racing and speed, and he just wants to go out there and he had an opportunity to go out there and race a little bit and own a race car. And that almost didn't pan out without sponsorship and some of the finances. But along the way, the business grew and the sport grew. And there were times in the late 90s, through like 2006, 7, where financially, it was pretty viable.
Yep.
Where you looked at the expenses, you looked at the sponsorship, TV revenue, and merchandise, all the different revenue streams were pretty good. And then it was, well, heck, I'm not here to necessarily make a lot of money. I'm here to reinvest in my company and grow it. And so the profitability was there. And then, of course, you invest in it, it grows, and all of a sudden, economics change a bit. It gets more expensive. We had 2007, 2008, bit of a financial crisis there, and companies started pulling back and changing the way that they looked at marketing and sponsors, spending with race teams. But yet the TV, revenue continued to just tick up 4% approximately every year. So I would say, those have been, ever since then, it's been challenging every year to reinvest in the company, in your people. And then, Next Gen came along a couple of years ago. And I think Next Gen has the potential to really work well.
Potential.
But the changeover was what hurt a lot of teams, at least existing teams, like us.
Got it.
It just, we were manufacturing every part and piece on our car. The engine, the chassis, suspension components, you name it. And while we were spending too much and probably too many options of all of those things, we also, we're seeing where there were rules being implemented to help homologate some of those things. But then Next Gen came along, and it's like, okay, now we have to completely switch gears. We're no longer manufacturing all these things. What are we going to do with our manufacturing facility and all the people that we have doing that? And then get rid of all the parts and the pieces that we had. Try to find a buyer for them to recoup some of that, but then also buy all new parts and pieces. So I think when I look at the car today and what it costs and how we're going to monetize that over the lifespan of Next Gen, assuming there's not going to be some major changes, then I think that it has the ability to get us back where we need to be. But it's going to take us several years, to get through these first few years.
Brad or Heather, anything to add?
Go ahead, Heather.
I just was going to say, and I think, the working with sponsors, trying to find that sponsor that's going to bring a huge amount has been, challenging and tough. And as the sport's changed. So, you know, people, their marketing dollars are really important. So that's been a huge challenge for us. We don't have any other industry that's funding our organization. So every penny goes right back in to, you know, to pay our people and keep our sponsors happy. So we absolutely thrive. We live, I mean, it's completely dependent upon that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Abe, I think Jeff hit a lot of great points, and Heather too, but you know, what's interesting to me is you see the competition on the track, and I think everyone recognizes how difficult it is. There's a lot of great talent, a lot of resources. It's easy to lose sight how competitive it is, you know, kind of away from the racetrack in the boardrooms at the ownership level. I don't know if that really gets enough credit inside of it, certainly not outside of the industry. And you know, it's got the sport in this really unique place to me when you talk about the model, you know, and the financials behind it, where you know, you either want to be at the very top, where Jeff is right now, and Heather, quite frankly, or at the very bottom, because those are the only two places that really make a lot of sense. You know, if you're at the bottom, and I think you might see this in some sports models with baseball, there's been a lot of talk about that, where you have the kind of this, right, hey, we're not going to use a lot of money, we're going to, you know, preserve capital, and then we're going to ramp back up. Or when you're at the top, of course, you can demand the revenues that you need from partners and so forth. So ultimately, that's kind of a unique way of saying is the middle is a really bad place to be. And because of that, there's really no middle class kind of in NASCAR. There's the top and there's the bottom, and those are two okay places to live. And to me, the middle is the worst, right? You're not getting the results. You can't generate the revenue. You're probably spending the majority of the same money and resources. And so I think you see this dynamic where, you know, you're incentivized to either be at the top or at the bottom and not the middle. And that makes, someone has to live in the middle, right? So that makes the business model in the middle probably the hardest.
5 years ago, if we had this session, there'd be a lot of concern, angst, consternation about the next, I would say, generation of NASCAR owners. I think the sport's made tremendous progress in the last couple of years. Don't you agree? And Heather, I'll start with you on that.
No, I mean, absolutely. Obviously, you know, we spent a lot of time and effort over the past 5 to 7 years, and it kind of went out the window because everything that we had planned, you know, fell apart, for at least for our family. So what we decided was strengthening our leadership so that it would sustain past, you know, any other kind of bumps that we may go through in the road. And we hired outside the sport, actually. And then we brought in Michael Catella, who has, you know, 37 years in the automotive industry and a technical director in all kinds of different motorsports. So it was great to bring in his perspective and strengthen our leadership with someone kind of outside the industry.
And now with Harris Blitzer,
yes.
I mean, Josh Harris and David Blitzer are unbelievable acumen in sports and bringing them on.
I mean, they're incredible. I mean, that was the whole point, really, is to find a partner that could, you know, strengthen the race team, help us, you know, build better business practices, and they're, you know, actually 5 of our leadership team are with them right now in New Jersey, you know, learning best practices from other, you know, from NBA teams to everything else. And so it's been a really great relationship. And Josh and his family and David and his family, we really connected. They're great, you know, really strong family. And probably the most important thing to Jokers Racing, aside from winning races and being competitive, is just our charitable giving, and they really supported that, and so it was just an easy fit for them.
And you two have seen changes in terms of the makeup of ownership.
Well, I think this panel,
Yeah.
you know, speaks volumes of it. You know, you see what Denny's doing, Tony Stewart and Jimmy Johnson, you know, several others, as well as family members. So, I mean, I think the future of the leadership with the race teams and the business is bright, but that, I think, puts more emphasis on the sustainability of the economics. Because, you know, I think that the patriarchs, you know, that are either have been in place or in, you know, currently there, they're not necessarily looking at the sport as, hey, this is a part of my revenue, or, you know, this is an extension of their business. Not in all cases, but in Rick Hendrick's, you know, case, maybe Roger Penske, it ties into their other business. Well, you know, what happens in that day when it's time for the succession plan to go into place? Well, now the business is going to have to really operate, and it's going to have to be able to generate revenue from a lot of different revenue streams in order for it to continue the legacy of what was built, as well as be, a revenue generator into the future.
Anything to add there, Brad, in terms of?
Yeah, I think it's natural that you're going to see changes. I mean, no one wants to lose their business. No one wants to see it go under. There's a lot of people that have spent decades. And, the ones that stand out, you talk about the Bud Moores and the Doug Yates or the Robert Yates Racing. Those are guys that put their entire life into the sport. And ultimately, when it was all said and done, they didn't really get anything out of it. And it didn't endure, it didn't sustain, as I think Jeff said. And that's really sad. It's sad for them, but it's sad for also the history of our sport. We're in the Hall of Fame, which I think is kind of fitting.
Good point.
And both of those, I'm sure, are they have places in the Hall of Fame. And you want to see those businesses continue on, and those families or their heirs have that chance. And so, in order for that to happen, you need to have a business model that can be successful for that.
Question from the audience: why should charters be permanent?
Yeah, I think when you look at, again, talking about different revenue streams, talking about the viability and sustainability of the race teams long term, you're trying to build value. And so, there's been a lot of discussions about permanency or some form of permanency.
Right.
And I think that's what, the teams are really looking for is just something that doesn't come to a halt at the end of, a TV negotiation or a certain date. And we all know that there's economics that still need to be negotiated no matter what happens, with those types of contracts. But if the teams knew that, we are going to be able to grow this business and be partners, in the sport long term, I think that we're all willing to collaborate a lot more. We're all willing to invest more, and we all know we have something to fall back on. If the economics, do slightly change, because the value is
so that
there.
continuity, that stability of knowing those charters are permanent are going to be paramount to that.
Definitely.
Yeah. Talk about a little bit about a couple questions here related to driver power, star power, next gen of drivers and their appeal and their profile in the public. I mean, I remember when you hosted Saturday Night Live. Okay, I'm dating myself, I'm dating
Me
you
too.
probably, but where are we in building star power among drivers? I mean, you've got you standing right here, but do we have those next gen of?
It's a very interesting conversation, and I look forward to hearing Brad and Heather's perspective, because we all definitely have different ones. I mean, when I was coming up in the sport, there were a lot of opportunities. The sport was trending, it was growing, and it just seemed like the opportunities were around every corner. These days, there's a lot of avenues out there. There's a lot of different ways to get your brand or your name out there, and there's a lot more competition as it relates to that too, as far as other athletes or people that are stars on YouTube or whatever other, they might not necessarily be an athlete, but you're still competing with them for brand awareness or a Q score or what might interest a company wanting to be a sponsor or do a PSA with you. So, but I think our drivers are incredibly important, right? Because they're the stars in the show on the track. Our sponsors want to be connected to them. That's what the fans, that's what the customers really connect to. So, depending on their personality or their popularity or the things that they're interested in, I think that coming out is super important. But I'd also say, and Joey Logano, I heard him say this the other day, and it kind of hit me, and I was like, I love this, is that in all other sports, the teams are kind of what the fans are drawn to. I'm a 49er fan,
Right,
so I'm sorry. I hope there are no Cleveland Brown fans in here, because I'm pretty upset with them right now. They beat my Niners this past
I think you'll be okay.
I hope so. But no, I mean, no matter who the players are, I'm going to like, those players on that team. Joe Montana, of course, is, one of my heroes. And I loved him because he was a 49er. When he left the 49ers and went to the Kansas City Chiefs, I was like, who's the new quarterback? And so I think that we have a role as race teams to build our brand up, just, maybe not as much as the star power of the driver, but in a way where, as drivers, and we've seen this, right, recently, where Jimmy Johnson and Dale Jr. and myself, several big drivers that had huge fan followings stepped away from the sport, and I think it had a big impact on the sport because the fans seem to not have the connection to the team as strongly as they did to the driver. So I
you
think
do fear teams losing some equity in terms of fandom if drivers become so powerful that they follow the driver.
well, I want them to follow the driver, but when the driver steps
right.
away,
Yep.
I don't want them to stop following the sport.
Got it. Yeah.
I mean, I would say for me, especially having the youngest driver out there who necessarily doesn't want all the attention, that, you know, you've got so many other players in the field. And I think that the personality of our pit crews have really taken off. And I think, and there's so much diversity. They come from so many different backgrounds. Most of them didn't grow up saying, I'm going to change tires for a living. And some of these guys don't know anything about NASCAR. They're phenomenal athletes. So I love their storyline. I think they're so much fun and can draw in a whole different audience and maybe take the pressure off, you know, if that's a branding of the whole team. We actually use that with a sponsor that just came in, just saying, you know, it may not be just the driver, but you've got so many other storylines, which is, you know, they want content.
Well, I think that the conversation is one that we're going to hear. We've heard in the past, and we're going to hear it a lot. And I really think it actually connects back to some of the previous questions around things like permanent charters and, you know, team enterprise value. In the sense of right now, there's not a really good ROI for the teams to invest. You know, it takes a long time to invest driver star power, unless you have some inherent, you know, you think of Chase that way, and he had, you know, the ability to build off of a name and a brand. But most drivers don't. Most drivers that come through. So that takes a significant investment from someone. Now, in years past, that used to be the partners. You know, I look at a guy like Rusty Wallace, and you know, you look at the Miller Beer Company and what they did for him to build his brand, and that was a big investment over a lot of years. And Jeff, same thing with DuPont, and he certainly earned it with wins to go with it. And those two connect into something very powerful. I think our partners are less willing to do that than they were in years past. So that really puts the burden on the team to do so. And I think that's a huge burden for them. And to that point, if a driver leaves, they've lost that investment, which is not great. And they don't get anything long-lasting, you know, value out of it in the sense of, because we're not connected back to the sport with permanent charters and things like that. If that driver leaves and goes to another team, that's just a complete loss, right? And so I think that's a long-winded way of saying we're not fully aligned at this time, in my opinion, as a sport to fully capitalize on driver star power. And that creates, because we're not aligned, that creates a lack of really true incentives, and we're not getting enough movement there. But I think it is really important that we create some kind of system that connects all of this. And permanent charters is one of those in my mind, because if you lose a driver as a team that you've invested a ton of money in, he's still in the sport, well, that's still good for my franchise, right? But right now, like if I invest a ton of money in a driver, and they get to their next contract negotiation, and Jeff says, hey, I got a couple $1 million more for you, like, all right, I just lost that big investment I made, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, you'll take it, right?
I'll take advantage of it.
You'll take advantage of it, right? But I don't get anything back for
No,
it,
you
right?
don't. It's not like you get future draft picks or anything like that.
So there's we have not found a way, or at least we haven't instilled a way to connect this into a system that rewards everybody. Until that happens, it's not a good investment. And from our perspective, rather than spending, you know, however many millions of our budget on building driver star power, we're going to put it on the next tire changer or the next spotter or whatever it might be. We'll find somewhere else for that money.
Not to be provocative, Brad, but do you think you're closer in alignment than you were 5 years ago with NASCAR on things?
I mean, I think there's been some progress from where the sport was 5 years ago. There's no doubt about that. But, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunity still.
You talk about the success at RFK Racing. A couple questions here. Can you point to one or two things you did, not you specifically, but you as an organization, that's led to the turnaround because you've had great success?
You know, this is still a people sport at the end of the day. And, you know, you throw in a cool car and sits in a room and it's shiny and everybody goes, ooh, and that's great. But ultimately, there's a bunch of people that work behind the scenes that put it together.
We had the sign come up 2-minute warning. I think a minute has taken off time since then, so I'm going to ask you to be brief. Very quickly. Last
I messed
question.
this up from the first get-go.
Not just the Brock Purdy quarterback series, but no, this one here is biggest story in NASCAR that you're watching or keeping your eye on over the next 18 to 24 months is, Brad, I'll start in the middle with you.
Well, I get the easy one,
Yeah.
the TV deal, right?
TV deal.
I mean, it's the majority of the revenue of the sport,
Yep.
right? And almost everything else pales in comparison. it has such a trickle-down effect to every person. And literally to the janitor in our building is affected by the TV deal. So I don't know anything can come close to that. Sorry, I'm glad I got
Well, no, but we will know that, right, long before the 2025. So we're going to have a good idea of what that looks like. So I think what to Brad's point of who gets it, how do they portray the sport, how do they take the sport to the next level, and how we interact with them, I think is going to be a big part of it, as well as what Heather said, the schedule, right? We know what the schedule is next year, but we knew that there were a lot of things that were in the works that maybe weren't able to be implemented in 24 that will be, and then beyond. Where else can we go in 2025 and beyond?
Last word.
I was just going to say that I think the schedule is going to be really exciting to see where it goes. And obviously, getting those permanent charters are really important to us for our family. So we'll see. To be continued, I guess.
Yes.
Well, it's a fascinating time in this sport, and I'm glad we're spending an afternoon talking about so many of the issues. So, great first panel. I want to thank our panelists, and Jeff, Brad, and Heather, and give it up for them. I'm turning it back over to Jonathan, and we're going to exit, I believe, this way.